AchtungMillwal supports the Lions Food Hub, and all of our advertising revenues will be donated to support this fantastic initiative. It's now based at the Lions Centre on Bolina Road, and it's run by our own Kelly Webster. This is a friendly food bank supporting families in the Bermondsey and SE16 area. If you can help support the Lions Food Hub in any way, please visit @Lions Food Hub on Twitter or get in touch with us at AchtungMillwal. The Lions Food Hub. Come on, you Lions.
You're listening to AchtungMillwal, broadcasting from the beautiful South Birmingham. Accept no substitute.
Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to a special edition, a new series of AchtungMillwal History Hours with Nick and Neil Fissler. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Hello, Nick. How you going, mate?
I'm good. This is a really interesting little project that Neil suggested to me, and I think it's a great format. We're going to be looking, Neil, aren't we, at the forthcoming month's fixtures, and we're going to refer back to games and incidents and stories that we pick up along the way related to those forthcoming fixtures, beginning with QPR on Saturday now. Season's nearly upon us.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, but it's crept up from almost nowhere, hasn't it? Yeah, no, well, this is just an advanced thing, I think, on your random fixture show that you put out last season. Great series. And so we're just taking it one step further, aren't we? We're just going to look at every game we've got this month. Disclaimer. Absolutely. If we do beat Portsmouth in the Carabao Cup, whatever it's called this season, there will be an extra game, but that obviously won't be included in this.
No, we can't anticipate that, nor who will draw if we do get past Pompey. But so we're going to be looking forwards, listeners. And as Neil says, it is a kind of a continuation of the random fixture idea, but it gives it a little bit of structure. And we'll do this about once a month to reflect next month's fixtures, so to speak. So Neil, we're going to begin with Queen's Park Rangers versus Millwall on August the 7th, this coming Saturday, as we record. I've chosen the fixture from the past: Millwall 3, Queen's Park Rangers 2, dear listeners, dated the 1st of October 1988 in Division 1 in front of 14,103 spectators at Coldblow Lane, which included myself. And what was the significance of that result, Neil Fissler?
The result took us to the top of the First Division for the first time in club history, I believe.
It did indeed. It was a wonderful day. You can see footage of this on YouTube, actually. I think it's basically the goals. Do seek it out, listeners. It was one of those golden afternoons. I think that season, Neil, was, I don't know how it is for you, but it exists in a kind of a golden haze in my mind. It's wonderful moment on wonderful moment. And this was obviously, as you said, gone top of the league there. It was a historic moment, but a emotionally uplifting day, wasn't it? It was just wonderful to be there.
I think it's just one of those things where it ranks alongside the great Millwall moments in history, doesn't it? Where you can say you're at the FA Cup final, you went to the European games against Ferencváros, home and away.
Yeah.
And you can also say I was there on the 1st of October 1988 when Millwall went to the top of the First Division table for the first time in club history.
And it was a moment. I mean, I the next day I went out and bought a copy of the Sunday paper. I think it was the News of the World, and I'd cut out the league table. I had that league table for many years, kept it as a souvenir of this moment where we went top of the league above the whole 92 clubs. It was incredible. 3-2 win for the Lions that day, dear listeners. Goals from Cascarino in the 12th minute. Equalised by Trevor Francis, who I just picked out as a player, Neil. Trevor Francis playing for QPR, obviously, that day. Just as an aside, really, and the show that we're doing, listeners, doesn't have any particular rigid format, so expect us to leap off at tangents. But Neil, I looked at Trevor Francis's career, and wow, what a career! 626 Football League fixtures, an incredible player. He doesn't seem to get the what's the word? I don't know, the respect, the love that other players get, and yet he's a landmark figure in English football history, isn't he?
Well, yeah, but obviously, he was the first £1 million
That's
footballer,
right.
wasn't he?
That's right.
And really was a top striker in his day.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, no, I agree. I think he should be up there with those that we talk about on a regular basis. And with the hushed tones. Actually, one of his early goals was against Millwall, I think, in about 1970.
Well, he would feature for
When,
Birmingham, obviously in the early 70s.
when he just broke into Birmingham's team, when
That's
he
right.
really looked like becoming the next big thing in English football. Really, he crashed upon the scene, didn't he?
He did. Highly talented striker. Through the 70s, £1 million player with Brian Clough at Nottingham Forest. He would win the European Cup, of course. I don't know if it was it twice. He would have won it in they won it 2 seasons in succession, didn't they? At the end of the 70s.
Yeah, but he scored, of course, against Malmo in
He
the game
did.
they won
He
one
did.
0. I actually had the pleasure of interviewing him
Did you?
for the Football League paper
Yeah.
on one of my Where Are They Now series. Him and Archie Gemmell
Another great player. Wow.
and
I mean,
John Robertson. Actually, they were there, and I said to him, "How did this £1 million deal come about?"
mm,
He said, "Well, Cloughie wanted me, and we just went off to the City Ground. We were given permission to talk. I went off to the City Ground with the missus, no agent or anything." And Brian Clough said, "Well, we'll give you this." And he said, "Oh, I don't quite want that." And he tried to negotiate, I believe. Uh,
£1 million player. It was quite a thing in its day. I mean, obviously now we're talking on the day where Jack Grealish has been spoken of as a £100 million player, and you see bigger figures than that quoted for possibly Harry Kane to go to Manchester City. But this was a big deal at the time. Trevor Francis
this
joining.
was a groundbreaker, Nick, wasn't it? Because
Yes, it was.
nobody
Yeah.
had spent £1 million. And back then, £1 million was actually a mind blowing sum of money, isn't it? £1 million now, I doubt it buys you a flat in most parts of London, does it? You probably couldn't even buy a garage for that in some places. And they're spending £1 million. But you actually look at that QPR team that season, there was actually Millwall connections there. Nicky Johns played in goal.
Nicky Johns, was he in goal
And
that day? Was he?
Gavin Maguire also had a
Gavin
spell.
Maguire. Yeah, well, I don't think Waddock was in that side then. In that case,
No, I don't think he was. No,
that predated him.
they had Faraday and a very good winger, wasn't he? And Steen up front, I think.
That's
With
right. Yeah.
Paul Parker at the back. So they'd actually had a poor start to that season, I think.
They're a decent side. As I say, Cascarino put us in front on 12. Trevor Francis equalised on 30. Just for 5 minutes, we were equal. And then Cascarino again, 35. And Herlock, one of his few goals. He never scored many for us, Terry, did he? He was a great midfield schemer, but didn't score many. But this was one that he did. He took quite was a shot from the edge of the penalty area, if memory serves. I haven't seen it for a while. And then that would be Clive Allen, I guess, on 72 minutes.
No, Martin Allen.
Martin Allen.
Mad Dog.
Oh, it was the Mad Dog. Okay.
It was the Mad Dog.
Millwall 3, QPR 2, top of the league. Wonderful days.
We can imagine actually Herlock and Martin Allen going at it in midfield.
These were the days.
Been a fight and that would have been all snarling, wouldn't it?
I do remember it was the following season, Neil. We played Manchester City in the FA Cup. The following season was a real damp squib, real disappointment. But we played City in the FA Cup at home, and I just remember this moment where it was like the immovable force meeting the unstoppable counter force. With a tackle with Terry Herlock and Peter Reid met in midfield. And there was this crunching tackle, and almost like a physical boom went round the den as the ball. How it didn't burst, I don't know. As this moment they both met in conflict in midfield. It was wonderful stuff. Two fantastic players.
That was actually, I think, our second London derby of the season. I think we beat Charlton quite early on, didn't we?
We had a period where we didn't leave the capital. We had like London derby on London derby, about 2 month period where we didn't leave the capital that season.
Yeah, well, I think I think we got off to a good start that season, didn't we? We were unbeaten for quite a long time, and this was actually, was it our 5th or 6th game unbeaten? I think.
Yeah, because I mean, looking back now, I suppose you always wonder how we're gonna play in the first division. It was our first time and the only time in the top flight. And I know that I was privately worried as to how good are we? Can we really compete at this level? But the adrenaline rush, Neil, of those early games, that first kind of few months. I mean, to be honest, we were contenders as late as March. We were in third place in the league table as late as March, and then it all fell away. But it was just like every game was like a cup tie. It was an incredible period in Mill history, wonderful times. The team that day didn't include Les Briley. Darren Morgan was playing alongside Terry Hill. I think Briley must have been injured that
Darren
particular day.
Morgan, blimey, that's a blast from the past, isn't it?
Well, this is the point of the show. We want blasts from the past. A dream day, top of the league. Wonderful, wonderful stuff.
It couldn't get much better, really, could it?
No, I've always thought as QPR as the Keir Starmers of football, Neil. Kind of, they're there, but they don't really make any great impact on the scene, so to speak. You know they exist, but somehow you don't take an awful lot of notice of them. But one point that did strike me, my research looking through Wiki, 20 grounds. They've had over 20 home grounds in their existence. Actually settling at Loftus Road in 1917, and that afterwards they've had 2 spells playing away at the White City Stadium. It's I mean, I know that we can't talk at Millwall, can we? We've had a few grounds on the Isle of Dogs, particularly, and then Coldblow Lane, but that's quite a lot. 20 grounds around Kensal Green, Queen's Park, and Shepherd's Bush, and those kinds of areas in those First World War days, I guess.
Yeah, but to be honest, I think that everybody that's going to QPR on Saturday will be wishing it was the 21st ground that they were going to, because you're in absolute danger of getting DVT or something quite nasty in that ground, aren't you?
It's
Yeah,
a
but you
very
can't
tightly
sit
packed
down.
little place, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't sit down. It's
Can't
always
sit
one of
down.
those grounds
No.
I've actually enjoyed going to. I think it was because when I lived in London, I lived on the Central Line, so it was just a Central Line straight across
Yeah, White City and
to White City, and then you'd go
yeah.
past the BBC, and we was yeah. You mentioned the White City Stadium. I think that's now where the BBC radio's based, isn't it? At the top of
Is that
South Africa Road, I believe that's where the White City Stadium was.
it was there. The BBC TV centre was round there as well, but I think that's been demolished. I don't know what they've done with it. I haven't been over there for some years now. But I mean, I've actually been to the White City Stadium, which did house some World Cup football, didn't it, in 1966? But I went there for some speedway, so
I'm
it's
very,
long
very
gone.
impressed. I'm very, very impressed that you've been to the White City Stadium. I must
Yeah,
admit, that is.
big, vast place. It was mostly a greyhound stadium, I think, in its latter days. It's housed all sorts of stuff, or had housed all sorts of stuff in its time. I've got to close this bit now. I just want to read the team out. This is a kind of a dream team. Brian Horn in goal, Ian Dawes, Steve Wood, Alan McCleary, Keith Stevens across the back line. The midfield, as we said, Terry Hurlock, who drew a yellow that day and the 3-2 win.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise. Alongside Darren Morgan, a very skillful, small player, probably too small for a professional in the end, but very skillful. I always liked watching Darren Morgan play. George Lawrence, who was replaced by Jimmy Carter in the 16th minute. Kevin O'Callaghan on the other wing. And up front, the dream front line, what we'd give for Cascarino, Tony Cascarino and Teddy Sheringham up front in our current Travail scoring goals. So there we are, Millwall 3, QPR 2 from 1988. You had to be there, dear listeners. You had to be there. One of those days.
Achtung, Millwal.
So there we are. Next up in the series of fixtures in August after QPR, we're playing Millwall versus Portsmouth at home in the Caribou Cup, formerly known as the League Cup, properly known as the League Cup. Really new. I can never quite. Something about sponsored competitions never sits quite
Yeah,
right.
the League Cup, Rumbelows Cup, Milk Cup. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but to me, it'll always
Milk
be
Cup.
the League Cup. It's the same as the FA Cup sponsored by Emirates and things like that. It'll just be the FA Cup. That's yeah, well, I
Call it
know
what it
for
is.
commercial reasons they call it whatever they call it, but I think for traditionalists like you and I, it will always be the League Cup, won't
Seemed
it?
to have more gravitas when it was the League Cup. But anyway, Millwall versus Portsmouth. Now, I've chosen a very personal and very special fixture from my own point of view. And this is Millwall 1, Portsmouth 0, dated 31st of March 1972. Towards the end of the near miss season, 1971-72 was the season that we came heartbreakingly close to getting promotion, only for it to be snatched away, seemingly at the last moment on the last day. And the reason I've chosen Millwall 1, Pompey 0-0 is that is the first ever game at Millwall that I ever went to. And I went there with some mates from my primary school. In these far off days, listeners, you could just go to a football match on a whim on the day. You didn't need to get a ticket. You could just pitch up, and a bunch of 11-year-olds it was just thought of normal that you'd get on a train at Elmstead Woods and travel across London into New Cross and be gone for the day. This was parenting of the 1970s, and we came back about 6-ish later that day, a buzz with the excitement of this result, which was played in front of 22,000 fans. Visit of Pompey. Lions were going very, very well at the time in the division, and it was a goal from Barry Bridges. I'm just looking at the Daily Mirror report from this particular fixture. Barry Bridges blasted Mill to the top of the second division yesterday. This report's dated the 1st of April 1972, ending a 3-month goal famine for Barry Bridges. Again, this is another classic side. Brian King's in goal. You've got Harry Cripps. You've got Brian Brown in defence. Barry Kitch in the centre there. Wonderful, a personal moment. This is football, Neil, isn't it? You kind of mark your own life in terms of great football moments. The two go hand in hand often, and this was a big moment in my life, actually. First time I
Yeah,
went
but it
to
was
the
a Good Friday, wasn't it? Yeah, well, I know.
Friday game. Yeah.
Well, it was a Good Friday, and there was 22,303 plus Nick Hart in the ground.
That's right. Behind the Coldblow Lane end goal, I was. What's the expression? My jaw dropped with the energy and the effing and the blinding and the hostility towards not only the Pompey players but also their own Millwall players as well. I couldn't believe it when chances were missed. You'd have blokes completely losing the plot and calling all the names under the sun to our own players. I mean, you get used to this, but as a child, you wonder what on earth's going on.
What made you go to that game, Nick, and not anything else before?
It was school. I mean, I went to school in Mottingham, and I used to love football. I mean, you follow football via television. There wasn't as much television, so it'd be Match of the Day and the Big Match back in those times. It was just some mates. One of my mates in class, primary school listeners, not secondary, primary school, was we're talking about football, and he said, "Do you want to go? Why don't we go Millwall?" And I didn't really know what was involved in that. I had, I obviously knew of the club and knew the name, but I didn't know much more than more about the glory clubs. So that would have been Manchester United, George Best, and Leeds, and Liverpool, and all those kinds of clubs at that time. It was just, why don't we go and watch Millwall? So, okay. I suppose they were doing well in the second division at the time, so there might have been some element of wanting to see some success. And off we went. About 4 or 5 of us got the train from Elmstead Woods all the way up to New Cross, made our way across what was still there's a park there. I think it's called Burgess Park, or is it Fulham Park? I can't remember which one it's called now, but it's right outside New Cross Station. And back then they were still bomb damaged streets. Slum clearance was going on. They were about to be demolished and it was going to be turned into open ground. But I remember walking past the empty shells of houses, Victorian streets there, Pagnell Street, I think it was called, one of them. And I don't know, it was a bit like I think as I said earlier on, my jaw dropped. I suppose I was seeing things that I hadn't seen before as a child, because my mum and dad moved away from Bermondsey to the fairly suburban, comparatively, realms of Nottingham, which was green and had trees, and although it was council housing, it wasn't intense council housing, whereas New Cross felt very, very different. So
You could breathe, couldn't you?
you could breathe. Well, it's one of the it's one of the reasons why Mum moved us away. She was didn't like the back then Bermondsey was an industrial area, so you would get pollution in the air, and I think she had an idea that it was cleaner in the country, as Nottingham was seen as the country, unbelievably. There we are. These were the far off days. So yeah, a 1-0 win for the Lions. It would all go square in the end, because on the final day of the season, promotion seemed to be in our hands, and then it would be snatched from our grasp. The Millwall team that day, Neil, some classic names here. Brian King, who we've spoken to, fortunately, on this show. Brian Brown, spelt with a Y. I've often seen his name misspelt. I've never seen or heard much of Brian Brown after his days. I mean, you do the "Where Are You Now" stuff. Have you? What became of Brian Brown after his Millwall days? Neil, can you
Brian
remember?
Brown, he ran a pub, the Jew,
The Dewdrop Inn.
on the Isle of Dogs.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the one. And then I believe he became a postman up at Mount Pleasant, or worked for the post office at Mount
Wow.
Pleasant.
Wow.
He's somebody I've actually not spoken to. I've spoken to
No.
an awful lot of players, especially from that team, because that is probably one of our best ever teams.
Oh, it's a classic side.
Yeah, well, we talk about
Yeah.
Cascarino and Sheringham, that
Yeah.
side that we just spoke about in '88, but this was a brilliant team, wasn't it?
Well,
And
these were the heroes, because the first team you see, or that they stick in your mind as a child, don't they? So you got Barry Kitchen there in central defence, Harry Cripps. To see Harry Cripps is quite something. He was. I'm trying to find the right words to describe Harry Cripps, because he was not conventionally. He was not a dirty player by any means. He was not even a conventionally physical player in some ways. He was. I've seen him described as an enthusiast. He was just a bundle of energy. He would not stop, and the crowd loved him at the Den.
he was a workman-like player, wasn't he? More than
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but he wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't spectacular, but
No,
he just personifies everything that's a Millwall player. He tried.
he tried, and the crowd loved him.
Yeah, but he might have smacked one or two players in his time, which probably never went down and too badly. And
You'll be much loved if you do that down the Den.
yeah, exactly. I've said to former players when I've done interviews with them, you've never needed to be the best player in the world at Millwall. You just needed to try.
Try it.
I,
Yeah, yeah.
I
No,
spoke to Brian King, as you did,
yeah.
and about this team, about this season, because this game took us 2 points clear of Norwich, 5 points clear
I
of
think
Birmingham,
so. Yeah, yeah.
and then I think we lost 2-1 at Fulham a day later, and we lost,
Yeah.
and then we drew 3-3 at Carlisle on the Tuesday, and all of a sudden Norwich were top of the table, and we were
chasing. Yeah,
yeah, and we had it all to do. But he tells me, Brian is very upfront. He'll tell
yeah,
you what he thinks,
yeah.
but he thinks we should have been promoted that season.
I
And
think we let it slip. Yeah.
he actually blames Eamon Dunphy. He said that he is not very pleasant at all about Eamon Dunphy.
Even when I spoke to him, I tried to broach the Dunphy subject with Brian, but he's I suppose we were speaking by phone, and he hadn't met me, and he didn't really know me, so I think he was probably more guarded, perhaps, than he might have been with Neil in some of his interviews. I think because Dunphy was also a writer. I think he remains a writer in his own right, but a very strongly opinionated man, an interesting character, Eamon Dunphy. As Brian King is an interesting character.
Brian's a great guy.
Yeah,
Really is a superb guy, and his book, if anybody's not read it,
it's well worth a read, isn't
it
it?
is brilliant. Just for the stories of when he went to Sweden and Norway, that kind.
Yeah.
It's a very, very well written book, and
a great goalkeeper, Neil. I mean, I think that's the thing that I was just looking at Barry Kitchener, obviously another hero of my own. Just It's not being disparaging towards someone like Harry Cripps, who's a club legend, but Barry Kitchener probably, as Brian said there, there's a few players in that side that should have played at a higher level and were loyal to Millwall in a way that maybe held them back a little bit. I don't know. But Barry was a very skillful defender and a very strong man and a leader on the pitch.
He thinks that Kit should have played for England, I believe.
Brian King could have played for England, should have played for England. And I think he was
on the bench once, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was on the bench against Portugal. Yeah. But we were at that time in the early 70s. There was a lot. The country was awash with great goalkeepers. I mean, Brian King was one of many. I think part of it was playing for an unfashionable club like Millwall, and I'd say the same with Barry Kitchener, to be honest. Across the midfield, Dennis Burnett, very cultured midfield player. Frank Saul on this day. Saul never really featured regularly in my time, but he was always there as a bit part player at that point. But I think he'd played in a cup final. Did he play for Spurs, Frank Saul?
Yeah, that's right.
His career.
Yeah, well, he made his name at Spurs. That actually ended up running some kind of garment business, I think, on
rag trade,
on Canvey Island or something. He was from that neck of the woods.
It's a
very
world.
Good player, I think, at Tottenham.
Yeah, I think skillful player. It's a very skillful player. Dougie Alder on the wing, a skillful winger, good player, good Mills servant. And a player that I've picked out, which I'll come back to when we run through the team, Derek Smethurst, who was not well loved at the Den. Took a lot of abuse. just for I wasn't quite sure because he always looked an okay player to me, but people took against him for some reason. But I want to come back to Derek Smethurst, if I may, because I think he was actually wasn't a bad player anyway. The amount of stick that he got on the occasions that I was there. And up front, we've got Gordon Bolland and Gary Bridges, two good players actually. Bolland was he came from Norwich, and he was I mentioned him previously as a very, very good striker and good club servant, scorer of many goals over the years.
And of course, Barry Bridges, I think, was an England international at one stage, wasn't he?
Ex-Chelsea player, I think.
Yeah, when he was at Chelsea, did he play in the Winners' Cup final for them or something?
I believe he had, and as you say, an England cap. So this was a decent side. With some real Millwall characters as well as some highly skilled players. I think that's probably the best description that we can give. 22.
Something I think that needs to be pointed out about that side is actually the manager, Benny Fenton.
Very shrewd manager, Neil. Very shrewd manager.
And I don't think he gets the plaudits he quite deserves.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't, no.
He's kind of been forgotten in Millwall history. But Benny Fenton built this side on a shoestring.
On a shoestring over many years. I mean, they talk about managers now having projects, don't they? You know, a rebuild.
Pep Guardiola is a project manager. Benny Fenton could have been the first ever project manager.
Well, he joined us in the mid-60s. I think it was it 66 or 67 that Benny came to us. This was probably the pinnacle of his career, in all honesty, and the near miss, as it turned out to be. So you're talking about a 5-year project, Neil, I think. You know, you're talking about a building process over that time.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of money around, so he had to be careful with it, didn't he? And I think Smethurst, came in from Chelsea.
Yeah.
I think Barry Bridges probably cost a few quid, but he picked up Bolland and a great player, Gordon Bolland.
A goal scorer. I think he played for Norwich previously, but I think Bolland, I think, played near almost 300 times for the Lions and scored goals. And I think Benny reminded me. We've spoken on the previous history shows, Neil, about Bob Hunter and his ability to find players that, you know, I mean, at different times. I appreciate that, but he would find players, and Benny had that ability to find. Let's mention Barry Bridges, who, as you said, played at a higher level, and Frank Saul, I guess. Some might have seen them as very much on the way out of the game. Somehow he would find some value still in there. He'd find players that had been around the track a few times and get some value out of them.
And he also picked up youngsters. Obviously, picked up Brian King from Chelmsford or somebody, wasn't it?
And Gordon Hill. Let's not forget Gordon Hill. Although I think he was only briefly in the Benny reigns. He would leave us, but you know, to find him and to field him, they're great players. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think Benny Fenton deserves more coverage, more love. I don't know which way you want to put it. I just wanted to mention Derek Smith first because he's an interesting character.
He's a friend of mine on Facebook, actually. I speak to him quite regularly.
Oh, do you? Oh, right.
Yeah. Go on then, Nick.
I'll edit this show.
Go on then.
Oh dear. Well, I'll edit that accordingly, Neil.
Yeah, no, come on.
No, I'm just looking at just an interesting life. Born in Durban in South Africa in 1947. As you say, he played briefly with Chelsea in the late 60s and was the first South African to win a European Championship when Chelsea won the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1970-71. None of which I appreciated when I was going to Millwall on this occasion because I didn't know much about the man. But I always thought him quite a skillful, kind of an attacking midfielder come forward. I mean, he's described as a forward on Wikipedia, but I don't know. He seemed to be more, the kind of player that would come from midfield and get forward. 71 appearances for the Lions from 1971 to 75, 9 goals listed here. But then he went on to make a career in America in the North American Soccer League, indoor and outdoor football, and was there for many years. And there was actually quite a success out there over time.
Florida, I believe.
Yeah, lives in Valrico in Florida, running a training centre. But I hadn't realised this is the bit that caught my eye. Neil, he played in the NFL, American football, in the pre-season anyway, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a place kicker, wearing jersey number 12. I never knew that. I've learned something doing the research for this show.
Funnily enough, I have asked him if he would come on to a former player interview, and he has agreed.
You keep turning me over, Fistler.
Sorry, I can't help it. Can I? Come on.
Well, I'll ask him about the Cold Blow Lane. He seemed to get a lot of unfair stick to me as a kid, but I wasn't. I didn't have enough depth of knowledge to know whether it was justified or not.
Yeah, we're only trying to build your brand here. Come on.
So that would be wonderful. I mean, it'd be great to talk to Derek Smith first. He was one of those players in that very first game that I ever attended, which was Millwall 1, Pompey 0, dated March 31st, 1972.
Achtung, Millwall.
Now, next along the list of fixtures is Millwall at home to Blackburn. So we're going to look at Blackburn. Now, the one I've picked out, again, is a fairly obvious one, really, dear listeners. I make little apology for this. So I'll make no apology. It's a fairly obvious choice, Neil, for Millwall at home to Blackburn fixtures. I'm going to go back to 1988 again. I'm sorry. Some of us have never left the 80s, dear listeners. But I have for you Millwall 1, Blackburn Rovers 4. Played on the 7th of May, 1988. And I think probably fair to say it was a disappointing result, but I think the Millwall side had been on the piss all week, effectively, hadn't they?
Absolutely. Funnily enough, I made that. You will have actually made that note here. Yeah, it was a week after the whole game, wasn't it? I think Callie's penalty.
We'd won the championship. We'd been promoted inadvertently. Not inadvertently. It's the wrong choice of word. Unexpectedly, we'd won the championship of the second division. And this game was the kind of, it was a presentation of the trophy. You can see lots of this stuff online. Just go on YouTube, just search for Millwall v Blackburn 1988. You'll find it. Someone's put some kind of almost like home video of the players on the pitch. John Docherty. It's wonderful footage. I don't know if you've ever seen it, Neil. It's lovely to look back at this stuff.
Yeah, no, it is. I think it was our crowning, wasn't it? Our coronation.
A coronation
as champions. Title already assured. I think we'd been unbeaten in 12 games until Blackburn rolled into town.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a wonderful
carnival atmosphere. There was probably half and half scarves, them silly foam hands,
the ski hats that people used to wear back in those times.
Everything would have been. The players were probably still drinking on the morning of the game.
It's just a wonderful. I mean, I'm looking at the Daily Mirror. This is Sunday Mirror. Tell a lie. Of it'll be the 8th of May, 1988, and there's an interview of sorts with John Docherty, Millwall manager. He says here, Docherty admitted after this 4-1 thumping at home to Blackburn. I knew it was going to be difficult to finish the season in style, Neil, because it's been mayhem here ever since we made sure of the title on Monday. Mayhem.
Superb. Yeah, but that's all you can ask for. Mayhem at Millwall, isn't it?
And it goes on. I mean, so we've got mayhem all week. That means no training and plenty of drinking. Our preparations for the match were a shambles. This is the manager talking. We were a shambles, as it was almost impossible to work at times because of the number of people who contacted us sending their best wishes. I think that might have been Scotch, gin, lager. that kind of best wishes. And it goes on, listeners. For those that don't know, I mean, yes, we were second division champions. We were going to be promoted for the first time in our history. But the effect of this result was to mean that Blackburn pushed out Crystal Palace to get into the playoffs. So there's a report here of a fuming Steve Coppell who was looking for the Lions to do him a favour, Neil.
Why should we do them a favour? Honestly.
He's heartbroken, according to the Sunday Mirror.
Good.
It was last night cursing a radio station that cruelly gave his club. It gets better still, listeners. A radio station had given his club false hope that Millwall were leading 4-1 instead of stumbling around in a hangover with the second division trophy in the trophy room. It wasn't a very big one at Coldblow Lane. Stumbling around in a kind of a hangover state, and suddenly Coppell's been told that we're winning 4-1, and it all went wrong for him. So Palace got pushed out of the playoffs.
That must actually have been a Millwall fan that couldn't get a ticket. Yeah, thought he would actually raise Steve Coppell's hopes by telling him that we were winning 4-1, when in effect we were severely hungover. And I'm surprised that we got one.
I can't remember much about the day other than the fact that the den was packed, flags, blue and white everywhere. Presentation, I remember that well. The game itself, no, I mean that was moved swiftly on from the game.
I think actually in those days, didn't the presentations take place before the game?
Yeah, we got the trophy before the game, so you know.
It wasn't. Now it's afterwards, yeah. Quite, yeah. I don't know why they used to give trophies before the game in those days.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question because everyone was singing along with a crowd. It was a party before the game basically, and then we had to go and play a match ill prepared. Let's just put it that way. Leave it there. Ill prepared for a professional match. Blackburn would go into a strange playoffs that season, actually. That featured the Chelsea, who were fighting relegation from Division 1, and they were part of a 4-team playoff semi-final and final tournament. They would make it to the final where Chelsea would make it to the final. Blackburn would be pushed out, I think, by Middlesbrough, who would actually prevail over Chelsea over 2 legs, which would include some bad behaviour at Stamford Bridge, which we can't condone on this station, of course. Middlesbrough promoted whilst mayhem took place at Stamford Bridge. So wonderful, wonderful day, Neil. Like I said earlier, 1988 golden year. This was one of the golden moments of that season, and it would continue, of course, a few months later in Division 1.
I think actually the playoffs in those days, they were a new thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a thing where the team in the first division had to actually win the playoff to actually avoid relegation, didn't they? And if
was it done that way?
Because I think that Charlton and Leeds had a similar situation where I think they drew 3 or 4 times, or they played 3 or 4 games after drawing 3 times, something like that. And then I think they realised that it probably didn't work, and they changed the format as to we know it now.
Yeah, so you were relegated if you're based on league position from the top flight, and then the teams coming up from the division below were the ones that actually played off. I've seen it done with the top flight side. I think Germany does it that way still, Neil. I think they have a relegation shootout plus stroke promotion playoff system in the Bundesliga. I don't know if any other nations do that, but it was I mean, what a dramatic game! And there was a two-legged game, Middlesbrough and I think Chelsea had the advantage of the second leg at home, but they still managed to flop,
Fluff it up, yeah.
leading to Stamford Bridge mayhem.
Achtung, Millwall.
Just to interject on the show a moment, if I may, dear listeners, I received an email from Millwall fan Rob Woodford, who is a qualified London cabbie and London guide. And Rob is organising a walkabout, a Millwall History Walkabout and Heritage Day on the 4th of September, starting from West India Quay Station at 11 a.m. on Saturday, the 4th of September. And it's going to be covering the origins of the club that we love, Millwall, in Docklands, a couple of the pubs, the George, and of course the Lord Nelson, including the sites of the former grounds and local history along the way. It sounds like an utterly fantastic event. I'm going to put a link to buy tickets, £12.50 from Eventbrite. I'll stick that Eventbrite link in the show notes and in Twitter and the social media. Sounds like a really interesting day out. So Saturday, the 4th of September, Millwall History and Heritage Day with Millwall fan qualified guide Rob Woodford, and sounds like a really cracking day out. I wish I'd thought of doing it actually. Now you've said that, Rob. Thanks for letting me know that. And now, back to the show. So next up, we have the midweek fixture, Millwall versus Fulham, Neil. I picked out a fixture that I was at, and I can remember being here for this game. I can't remember an awful lot more about it, but I was at Millwall 4, Fulham 3, dated the 25th of April, 1982, Division 3 fixture, played at Coldblow Lane in front of just 6,354 fans. This was a pretty tough time in Millwall history, listeners, and you know we've spoken a lot about the glory days that will come later in the 80s. At this point, Neil, I must admit, it was very hard to see much at times, any future at all for the club. These were dark days, weren't they?
I think this was the dark days of Peter Anderson, wasn't it?
Peter Anderson, that's right. You don't talk to him on Facebook by any chance, do you?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to admit that on here, I'll tell you, mate. Yeah, but otherwise, before I know it, my social media account will
be bombarded,
be completely under fire, won't they?
Absolutely. But yeah,
this was one of the few bright sparks, I think, in a 7-goal thriller.
This was the 81-82 season, yeah, and this would have been Anderson's. I think this was his main season in charge. This was very much his season where he was, he had complete control rather than picking up the pieces from other people. And it was a tough gig, but this was quite an entertaining game. We've got a Millwall side this day. I'll read out some of these names, some really great names here. Paul Sansom in goal. Anyone who can remember Paul Sansom?
Actually fractured his leg in that game.
Sansom replaced by Nicky Chatterton because he was injured in the 74th minute. He had to go off. So Chatterton went in goal for the last 16 minutes of the match. Dean Neal coming in as a substitute. The back line of this game: Laurie Madden, Barry Kitchener, still there in '82. I think this was very much at the end of Kitch's career now. Paul Roberts, who I think you've mentioned, you've spoken to on a previous show, Neil, haven't you? Paul Roberts and Keith Stevens. And then in the midfield, Bobby Shinton. That was a name. When I did some research for this one, listeners, there's a name that I'd just forgotten. I'd forgotten that Bobby Shinton played for Millwall. Peter Anderson. I could never forget.
Signing, wasn't it?
Yeah, City, that's right. Peter Anderson, who I could never forget, played for Millwall and managed this. Nicky Chatterton, we've touched on. Alan West, I'd forgotten Alan West played for us, so there's another name from the past. And then Dave Martin and Dean Horrocks. I've mentioned Dean Horrocks here, obviously very tragically passed away. I think he passed away in 1988 in a car accident. He was a big favourite at the Den, Dean Horrocks, now, wasn't he?
Yeah, guy who obviously came through that great youth team, didn't he, in 78, 79. Was a player that was destined for quite big things, wasn't he?
He was committed. He was a committed forward. He kind of gave one of those players that always gave you everything. As we've said earlier on, that will always go down well at the Den. He was committed 100%. Two spells in the early 80s, 1979 to 83. He made 72 appearances, 19 goals from those 72. He would then move on to Gillingham, and then his probably longest spell, his most successful period, I suppose, possibly at Reading in the mid 80s, 83 to 88. I think they had a promotion side during that period. Did they not have a? Was it John Docherty was managing them at that point? And
they had a couple of promotions around about then, didn't they? In the 80s, I think Reading.
Still playing at Elm Park, younger listeners at this point. The old ground, rather than the Majeski Stadium, whatever it's been sponsored by now. 35 goals for Reading, and then he would make a late return back to Millwall in the first division days as kind of cover. I think we might have had an injury for Cass or Teddy. I can't remember which way around, but he made 11 appearances, scoring just once in that second period. And then Bristol City, before tragedy would strike. Very sad story. A much loved player at the Den, Dean Horrocks, in my opinion.
I think he only played about 3 games just after joining Bristol City, didn't he?
Yeah, before it happened. Yeah,
killed in a car crash. Which
I'm just reading. This is a Daily Mirror, a very brief report, listeners. Back in those days, you didn't get much coverage in the 3rd and 4th division, and you were restricted in national press to Graham Baker's 3rd and 4th scene, which was like a column which featured all the clubs. So Millwall striker Dean Horrocks blasted the 3rd division promotion issue wide open. That didn't include us. That was Fulham, wide open with a hat trick hero Dean Horrocks against Fulham at the Den. Second place Fulham went 3-0 down before staging a brave recovery of goals from Roger Brown and Sean O'Driscoll. I think managed Doncaster later on, I believe, Sean O'Driscoll.
And Bournemouth.
And Bournemouth, was it? Okay.
1 or 2 others, yeah.
Horrocks hit his 3rd goal to put the game beyond Fulham's reach, but they pulled it back to 4-3 with an own goal by Keith Stevens. The Fulham were managed by Malcolm MacDonald at this point. And he's talking about the still being games in hand for the promotion push. Mill keepers Paul Sansom left the field after 74 minutes with a suspected fractured leg and was replaced by Peter Glesia. There's a name from the past, Neil. Peter Glesia.
Yeah, somebody else who actually played in the 79 Youth Cup side, which I think formed the nucleus. You were those that weren't sold off because we needed to pay the bills. I think Alan West, you mentioned Alan West, I think he was a friend of he was actually a friend of Peter Anderson, and Alan Thorne, I think, had come in from Luton as chairman, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Never mentioned a name to John Sitton.
Really? Don't like him.
God, it's almost as bad as Uber. You mention Uber to him, sets him off on a complete tangent. But you mentioned Thorne and Peter Anderson. He's convinced that Anderson only got the job because he was a mate of Thorne's at the time.
It's quite possible.
And then I think they brought in Alan West, who's actually the Reverend Alan West, who's now
Is he?
Achtung, Millwall.
Now we're going to move along, and I think next up is Cardiff, I believe, Neil, and Cardiff City. Neil was kindly suggested a figure. I couldn't find much that would that struck me, but you found a really interesting fixture from 1930. So we're going back a long time now, listeners. 4-4, Cardiff City 4, Millwall 4, dated the 6th of December 1930, in front of 8,000. And I actually didn't know many of these players. Now I've done a few of these kinds of shows over time, so you kind of get to know some of the main players. But this side, apart from 1 or 2, Jack Cock and was it Tom Forsyth up front? I didn't know many of these players' names at all. Yeah. So 4 goals for the Lions, 2 goals from a player, Joe Reedman. I'd never heard of Joe Reedman, and I didn't know his name whatsoever. So I've learned something, and 2 for Jack Cock, who I knew to be a prolific goal scorer and one that we've covered on previous fixtures. But I was intrigued by Joe Reedman. He was a decent striker. He was actually our second top scorer for this season after Jack Cock, which I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, no, he was somebody I think had been around Millwall for quite some time. Yeah, he was was a northern boy.
Hartlepool, born in West Hartlepool.
Yep.
Born in 1901, West Hartlepool. Passed away in 1973, aged 71 or 72, according to Wiki.
In Ramsgate in Kent. He died on the 8th of January. He'd had a bit of a career. He played for Bolton Wanderers,
Bournemouth. I got here.
Bournemouth, Brighton, and then joined us in July 1928.
Second highest top scorer this season. It would be a moderate season for Millwall. Would finish up, I think, about 6 places off the bottom, but certainly not in relegation trouble.
He was a get up and go type of player who realised his limitations and did not attempt to over elaborate. That's come from a book I've just written with Dave Sullivan.
Okay.
Millwall Who's Who, where we profile every player that's ever played for a first team game. And he faced competition from Will Phillips and then a guy called Andy Swallow.
Right.
When he first came to Millwall, and that 12 goals in 31 was actually his best return for the season.
That book will be handy if you want to set yourself up as a Millwall historian podcaster. I might get that book.
Yeah, like I think of one or two others that might be trying to get that book to set themselves up as a brand and a football history podcast. He settled in Ramsgate, where he worked as a ship's riveter.
Wow. I mean, this is one of the things. I mean, we've mentioned Brian Brown and others over time. You know, when the football career ended, there was no kind of there was no lavish life waiting. You went back to work in some fairly working, in working class kind of jobs back in those times, didn't you?
Yeah, funnily enough, I've just picked out another player that played in that side. It was a guy called Len Graham.
Yep.
Who was spotted by Bob Hunter, who we mentioned a number of times already on this podcast, playing for Leytonstone.
Okay, wow.
Obviously in East London. He played for the Football League, the FA, and won 2 England caps.
I mean, this team would be managed by the great, and I think he was a great manager, Bob Hunter, one of the great figures in our club. We've touched on him on our history shows we've done previously, Neil. And as with Benny Fenton, we mentioned earlier on in this one, I think Bob Hunter was a great finder of maybe players like Joe Reedman, who weren't exactly shining jewels, and yet somehow he'd get 12 goals out of them in Division 2 at a fairly high level.
Funnily enough, Bob Hunter, there was always a bit of a standing joke that he would disappear off to Scotland at the end of the football season and would return with a football team for us. He had terrific contacts in and around the Arbroath area, I think it was, and would just basically go up there on holiday and sign these players. Yeah. Some work out, some don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like anything, but it's just Len Graham, for instance, here, he actually played twice for Essex in the county championship in 1926.
Wow.
And went on to become a publican.
The traditional route out of the game.
That was after coaching in The Hague in Holland. He coached football and cricket.
So this game was a 4-4 draw. I've got a report, which I won't read the entirety. It's from a newspaper called the Weekly Dispatch, so I'm guessing that was a Sunday paper.
It was the Sunday paper, the Daily Dispatch, I believe.
So the 7th of December, 1930. Report on the game, but the concluding paragraph is that Millwall were the cleverer side, but Cardiff's doggedness saved the Welshmen. So that was their take on that 4-4 draw from 1930, all those years ago. And finally, therefore, for the month of August, our final preview for the fixtures is Millwall at home to Blackpool. And I've found a fixture here, Neil. We've fast forwarded somewhat from 1930 to 1999, listeners. So it should be the 98-99 season, the very end of it. This was a 1-0 win for the Lions over Blackpool, in front of 6,672 at Zampa Road now, new stadium. Thanks to a Neil Harris goal in the 8th minute. And I've just thought it might be interesting just to run through some. The names just bring back so many memories from some of these teams. We've touched on the classic sides of the 70s and 80s, and this was the beginnings of what will become another great side in Mill history, with one or two additions and reductions. Ben Roberts in goal, and then the back line, Jamie Stewart. Remember Jamie Stewart?
Yeah, player who got sacked by Charlton, I believe.
I believe he did.
Drugs test, didn't he, or something? Wasn't he one of the first players to fail a
Drugs test, didn't he? He had and yeah, you always had a sense he was a decent player, but lifestyle perhaps got in the way of that. So Jamie Stewart, Stewart never caught Joe Dolan, another character I think has been on some pod. Did you interview Joe Dolan there? Was it some?
I did interview Joe Dolan, and what a top guy Joe Dolan is.
Yeah, I mean, he came over very well, I thought, in that. Joe Dolan, big guy, big defender. I think he was injured. He lost his career too. Was he broken leg? I think.
Mate, he suffered 2 or 3 horrendous leg breaks, and he actually told me that he did his knee ligaments in training that wasn't ever disclosed.
Wow.
He actually started off as a midfielder at Chelsea.
Did he?
And then he moved into the back four, and a little known player came in and took his place, and he got released. That little known player was John Terry.
Well, if you're going to be edged out, you might as well be edged out by one of the best players in the national side for many years.
And he was actually going to become a PE teacher, he said.
Was he?
When he left Chelsea, that because I think his parents are PE teachers,
right?
And so he was minded to go into that, and then Millwall came along, and he thought, well, you only live once,
give it a go.
And he's ended up becoming a PE teacher in Australia. Actually took over at the school that Rhino was at.
Okay.
In Queensland, a public school over there.
Good luck to him. If you're listening to the show, Joe, I don't know if you listen to the show. I used to like you. I used to like that. You in defence, mate. It was one of my favourite players. So Stuart never caught Joe Dolan, we just mentioned, and then Gerard Lavin on the other side there, across the middle. Some of these players used to get some stick. I'm wary now if some players got stick because Neil seems to know so many of them. He talks to them on Facebook. I've already embarrassed myself with Derek Smithhurst.
And WhatsApp. I've got a fair few of these.
So I've got to be careful how I put it now because they're all going to be listening into Neil's show. So Ricky Newman, Mark Bircham, Tim Cahill, listeners. What a player! Signed from the backwoods of Australia.
Australian Institute of Sport or somewhere.
Something like that. And on the similar level, Lucas Neal on the other side of him there. Then up front, Neil Harris, and I put Eiffel up front. I don't know if that was the way that it actually played on the day, but two great players in Mill history, Neil Harris and Paul Eiffel. There's the seeds of a truly great Mill side in that team there, weren't there?
Absolutely superb. And actually, there's a guy there that we mentioned, Lucas Neal.
Yeah.
Another player I don't think got the credit that he deserved because he couldn't really get into our team towards the end, could he?
He never quite knew his position.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe he knew it, but the managers never knew where to play him.
That's right. And it just multi-talented guy, superb footballer who went to have decade-long career in the Premier League, didn't he? With Blackburn Rovers, and then
he was a skilled Australian international. He played in the World Cup, didn't he? Like Tim Cahill, I think he played for the Australian side. So he was a very, very skilled player, and always in one of those players. I kind of divide the football world into those that you would cross the road to watch and those you wouldn't. And he was one that you would. You'd want to see what Lucas could do. He had that ability to produce the unexpected.
That team was probably the last great youth team that we developed.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, a lot of those players we picked Paul Eiffel up from somewhere for next to nothing, and Neil Harris come from
Cambridge City, wasn't it? Famously.
Yeah, and Cahill and Joe Dolan had come from after being released by Chelsea.
Yeah.
So that was the nucleus of a very, very good and very, very successful side, and a side that really, I think they went to Wembley, I think a couple of weeks after this Blackpool game and lost.
For the AWS, was it that
Yeah,
season?
lost to Wigan.
Yeah, you're right. The 18th of April would be the Wigan Alta Windscreen Shield, which is a massive event. I mean, it sounds, I suppose, like what's the equivalent of the Johnston's Paint or whatever it's called now. It's easy to dismiss those tournaments, but I remember being exhilarated, Neil, at the thought that Millwall were going to play at Wembley Stadium, the old Wembley, the Twin Towers.
Yeah, and we took, what, 50,000 there, didn't we?
55,000 fans.
55,000,
Yeah.
and didn't Wigan have about 1,000 in the corner?
They won it with a handballed goal, didn't they? But anyway.
Yeah, and it probably actually one of the worst games of football that old Wembley ever saw, wasn't it?
It was a scruffy game. From what I saw of it, I was one thing about the old Wembley, which I would say to any younger listeners, that I know the modern Wembley has seen some controversy recently, but the old Wembley was an appalling view. I mean, I was actually stood behind the goal. I mean, what went on at the other end? I remember going there once when Argentina played England, and Diego Maradona was on the pitch. Apparently, but I couldn't have told you who it was. It might have been you, Fist. Might have been you, Fistler.
Yeah, well, I was actually at that game.
Was you? Was you?
With a couple of friends of mine.
I hope you saw more of Diego than I managed to. I knew he was out there. I can at least say I was in the same stadium when he played.
Yeah, well, one of my mates actually got lobbed out for singing "E.I. we won the war" at the time.
Because that's relevant to the situation.
I don't know. Yeah, well, we've been on the piss for about 4 days.
that never helps, but there we are.
But actually, this game against Blackpool, well, we're talking about games against Blackpool.
Yeah,
it was very difficult to find a game against Blackpool with any significance.
I was amazed how little we played them, Neil. You know, there's about a 30-year stretch where we didn't play Blackpool.
Yeah, but funnily enough, I was quite open that when we said this idea that we would do this kind of format,
yeah,
I thought, oh, great, Blackpool. Yeah, but we'll reminisce about Mortensen and
Sir Stanley.
And I could tell the story of how he sold his medal to Mike Melody off Dickinson's Real Deal, and then claimed that he got another one and things like that. But we just didn't play them.
No,
we just didn't play them for about 30 or 40 years, and I was starting to get worried.
Well, I was. I mean, I came up with this in the end. I thought, well, you know, there's a lot of Millwall content in that team. I mean, from back line all the way up to the front. So I was quite grateful to find this one that gave us a bit of conversation. But it's very difficult. There was a long period where we didn't play Blackpool. I suppose Blackpool were a top flight side for many years, and we weren't. So why would we come across them? You know.
Yeah, but it's the kind of place where I wish we didn't play them for quite a long time again.
Absolutely. You could do without them.
Because it is a kind of horrible place. I think I've seen Millwall up there 3 or 4 times. And
it's a ground and a place I've never been to. I think because it's such a long way, so you always find a reason not to go.
Every time I've been there, I think Tom Ince has scored against us, and the pitch has been bloody. The pitch has been like the Blackpool Pleasure Beach and
the Las Vegas of the North.
Yeah, that's right. Funnily enough, a friend of mine who actually writes in the Millwall programme owns a hotel up there, a guest house.
Does he?
So I've got absolutely zero excuse not to go.
To the
game in January. January in Blackpool.
It's going to be tough. Going to be tough. Millwall would finish the 98-99 season in 10th position. This was very much the seed, the germ of the side that would develop over 99 to 2001, when of course we would win the third tier, the second division, third tier, whatever you want to call it. We would go up as champions in 2000, 2001 with a truly great Millwall side managed by, at this point, Rhino and Macca, Keith Stevens, Alan McCleary, and then brought to a crescendo by Mark McGee. Just interesting looking at, just to conclude us, Neil, I was looking at the league table. We finished 10th in 98-99. Fulham would win the league that season. I think they were managed by Kevin Keegan, if memory serves.
I think that was the Al Fayed. That was the start of Al Fayed putting.
Yeah.
Or
the beginnings of his input, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that Keegan had brought them up from the bottom division, hadn't he? And he went straight through.
The Michael Jackson
Chairman Mo.
Michael Jackson statue hadn't yet been fitted, and Princess Diana was not yet part of the. I don't know. Maybe I won't dwell on the Princess Diana linkage. I might delete that. Manchester City is the times have changed. Manchester City came in third that particular season. And
was that the year when they won at Wembley against Gillingham?
Gillingham came, because Gillingham v Preston, Man City v Wigan, and I think that was that a draw, two all draw, and City went up
on penalties. Yeah, but didn't Nicky Weaver save a penalty? Then did a lap of honour or something?
It sounds good. And Burnley languishing in 15th. How the wheel turns. There we are. Well, that's the fixtures for August, dear listeners. Do tell us if you like this idea. I certainly enjoyed doing it, so we're going to carry on regardless, whether you like it or not.
You get stuck with us.
Do tell us if you enjoyed it. I was reading a list of tips for podcasters, one of which was to engage the audience by telling them how much you appreciate them listening. So I really appreciate you listening to us. Do tell us if you've enjoyed it, and we don't care if you didn't, because we're going to carry on anyway. So I'm not sure that was quite the point that the woman was writing about. There's good stuff now. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, no, well, I always enjoy talking history with you, Nick, and I think we've got some other shows planned, haven't we? We're going to try this.
Do tune into our football history podcast. I do put it out on the AchtungMillwal Twitter feed, and it has its own Twitter feed in its own right, but it's well worth, in my humble opinion, tuning in. It's not Millwall specifically, it's other clubs, but it's just a fascinating subject. You can go, there's so many branches and so many tangents you can go off at, and as I found even in this conversation, one thing leads into another, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, we love going off on a tangent, don't we?
Don't we just?
Yeah, well, no other podcast to do in Millwall will you get Michael Jackson statues,
politically incorrect references to Princess Diana,
Keir Starmer.
There we are, dear listeners. So thank you for listening to this show. Do appreciate it. If you have any thoughts, do give us a shout on Twitter. Email us on AchtungMillwal@gmail.com, and do tune into the Football History Podcast. So it's a big thank you to Neil Fissler. Thank you for your help on this one, Neil.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. I look forward to seeing what we can come up with next month.
Next month, yeah, we'll try and get another show out in time for the September fixtures. So until then, dear listeners, thank you for listening, and it's Arrivederci Millwall. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to AchtungMillwal. If you enjoyed the show, please go over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a cheeky little review. Arrivederci Millwall. Till next time.
Who do you want to watch?